Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host and Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. How's everybody doing? Hi, Adam. Excellent evening, people. Well, I was thinking that we might continue on with the Xanderhole video we started out with. He was beginning to tell us something about evil at the same time as he was making excuses for genocide. He was going to tell us all about how evil it is that somebody said there's no point in voting in this particular situation. And I think that could possibly be quite worthwhile in that very special sense that that it applies only to streams like this, where the reason it's worthwhile is that it absolutely is not worth anyone's while, including the while of the asshole who created it. Hello, Adria. So, what's everyone think? That sound good to everybody? Where we left off, for anyone who wasn't watching last night, Xanderhole was looking at a video from some, judging by the accent, English Marxist who was saying they didn't really see a particular point in voting right now, and Xanderhole thinks that's unironically evil. And he was explaining how by cunningly insisting on the same thing all along, leftists are being totes unfair to poor Joe Biden because he wants to not do the thing they're asking for, but he's realized that he can't actually say no to it because it's PR toxic waste that he can't touch. And so he's been using the word ceasefire to mean not a ceasefire. And the fucking lefties are so evil. You see, they're insisting on an actual ceasefire rather than what Joe Biden is prepared to call a ceasefire. Hey, Riveroon. Okay, let's do this thing. Gonna back it up a little bit, though.
Abstaining from the effects of who is president. You have a responsibility. You are a bad person if you do not vote. You simply are. If you do not.
Okay, so this is the moral case for voting for genocide that he's making here. See, you're a bad person if you don't
Vote to stop the Republican from taking power. You are a bad person, fundamentally.
Well, but what if the person that you're helping to get into power is also unironically, unambiguously, objectively evil? Then aren't you a bad person either way? I mean, it's not like... I mean, the way he's phrasing this is like, hey, you had some unambiguously morally good choice versus an unambiguously evil choice, rather than two unambiguously, utterly evil choices that, based on all the experience we've gathered with them, are likely to do the exact same shit, except the one is going to do it in a way that a lot of the liberals will feel the need to defend him, and the other one is going to do it in a way that is going to be very in your face, saying the quiet part out loud, and a lot of liberals are going to be freaked out about it. Yeah, I've been thinking that it's kind of an interesting move for an ex-Nazi like Xanderhole to have a logo that looks just vaguely like a stylized swastika. I thought that was an interesting style choice of his.
You are a morally bad person. You lack moral character. You
Those are just synonyms, my dude.
simply do. You are the kind of person who would watch a toddler get run over in the street.
Though I'm still...
It's funny that he's talking about bad things happening to toddlers, because like the guy that he's here standing for He's done some kind of fucked up shit to little kids. I mean, have you looked at what little kids in the north of Gaza are looking like right now? They're not having a good time. They're the ones who are dying right now because he will not order Netanyahu to open Rafah crossing and let the fucking aid in. I mean, so maybe don't use an example that is about the well-being of little children if you're gonna make this case. Because you have to accept that if you're, like, backing this motherfucker, you are saying that the well-being of at least some little children is totally up for grabs as far as you're concerned.
Arguing for a position of balance rather than outright condemnation. That being said, I believe recent developments have left this analysis obsolete.
It's gonna be Gaza. It's gonna be Israel and Gaza.
And that radicalism must now take a much more ruthless position to keep up with the changing consciousness of the wider public.
There is absolutely no universe, by the way, in which, like, radical far left, like, young people have enough political will in order to make the Democratic Party give in to them.
It's funny that he's saying this at the same time as he is speaking to an audience that includes at least some of those people, the young and naive ones, and he's explicitly trying to prevent them developing the will to do that. Like, and I think it's not the will that's missing, though, chat. I mean, I don't think that this is a particularly controversial thing to say, but I would say the will is absolutely there. People want him to stop. Like, I mean, the level of sustained protest and shit that we've seen, the will is there. The will is not what's lacking. What's lacking is a clear idea of what will actually get it done. And there's some signs of, some people are clearly getting it. There are some supply chain related actions going on, and that is wonderful. That is absolutely, like, that is the choke point that we have access to, and that could potentially make shit happen. But, I mean, it's not the will. If anything, it's having a clear idea of how to go about it. But, I mean, he doesn't get to talk about the will of young radical lefties. He doesn't get to talk about that because he's here trying to prevent them forming the will.
With a threat of not voting, because so many people that are, like, part of this far left young demographic already don't vote.
I mean, let's note that actually a lot of people who voted for Biden last time are saying they won't vote for him this time unless he stops committing genocide. Like, literally, the best thing the Democrats could do if they want to win this election is tell Biden it's time to lay it down. Like, I mean, he doesn't have a big career ahead of him. He has a long fucking horrible career behind him. They just need to tell him it's time to move on. I mean, somebody who's with the kind of life expectancy that Joe Biden and Donald Trump have at this point, both of their political machines will definitely have a plan B in place just in case biology takes its course. Like, I mean, if the Democrats really want to win this thing, they need to just do that. They need to just say, it's time to go. It's time to, like, be racist to your friends and family for a while. They miss you. Probably don't, though.
So actually, let's look at the voting turnout numbers. Voting turnout U.S. by age.
Do it by income, Xander.
This is going to be weighted a little bit by the fact that we saw the highest voter turnout for young people ever in 2020.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point you bring up.
So let's see. In 1988, the highest voter turnout... Wow, yeah, it's by a lot. By a lot. 18 to 29-year-olds have a 43% voter turnout, compared to 60-plus-year-olds who are vastly majority Republican, who have a 71% voter turnout.
Yeah, but here's the thing. When you look at it by age, you lose sight of the absolute numbers you're talking about. Because the reason Republicans are obsessed with gerrymandering and finding ways to suppress the black vote in particular is they're in the minority. They know they're in the minority. If everybody who like supports them votes and everybody who would otherwise support the Democrats would know, who has any likelihood of doing that were to vote for the Democrats, the Republicans would lose every time because their support base is a small minority in the country. So the way he's talking about that, of course, you lose sight of that. Yeah, he analyzes everything completely backwards. Because if you want to talk about voter turnout, one of the really key things that has happened. See, first of all, you want to talk about why Republicans have better voter turnout than Democrats. You have to talk about what their constituencies are, and the fact that the Republican constituency is made up of people who are basically largely getting a lot of the stuff that they want. And so they tend to be enthusiastic. Like, there was an interesting poll came out recently where they were asking voters, likely voters, are you voting for the person you support because you're supporting that person, or are you doing it because in order to vote against their opponent? And Trump's supporters, Trump's likely voters, overwhelmingly said they were voting for him. Because the thing is, he gives them the fucking red meat they're after. He gives them all the fucked up racist shit and, all the gifts to the rich that a largely affluent voter base is quite happy to eat right up. And if you look at the Democrats, it's overwhelmingly people are voting in order to oppose Trump. Like, almost nobody is voting because they like Biden on the other side of that. Now, and you look at turnout. You have to look at it by income, too. Because one of the things that happened when the Democrats went all right-wing starting in the 1990s was that working class turnout dropped heavily. The poorest one-third of the population, more or less, stopped giving a shit about elections because they were given no reason to give a shit about elections. And as a result, the percentage of voter turnout represented by people with an income over the equivalent in today's dollars of 90 grand skyrocketed. Like, you have to actually look at all these things, but instead he's just looking at age. And the thing is, age is not actually an entirely good predictor of opposing the genocide. Because 80% of Democrat voters oppose the genocide and want to see it end. It's not just young people.
While 45 to 59 and 30 to 44-year-old millennials and Gen Xers and whatnot fall within a 56 and 66% voter turnout rate. So if you're a politician, if you're like a Democrat, and you look at the 18 to 29-year-old demographic,
and you want to increase their turnout, what you would do is do things that appeal to them. And one thing that would appeal to them is never seeing anything to do with Joe Biden ever again. Like, just if you wanted to appeal to them and you didn't want to actually make any fundamental concessions, just not having Biden be the guy would be a way to increase their turnout exponentially already.
Mind you, 25 to 29-year-olds are probably weighing a lot of that 43% higher. Like, if we could get it broken down to like 18 to like 23, which really is where the majority of these young, radically progressive people are, I guarantee you.
Well, yeah. If you include the word "young," yes, the young ones are where the majority of the young, radically progressive, whatever the fuck that means, are. But he's talking about this like wanting a ceasefire is a radical position when it is in fact the majority position in the country. Leaving aside the political class who are against it, it is the mainstream position. 60% of the population, 80% of people who vote for Democrats. That is the overwhelmingly popular position. No president who's been elected in my lifetime has come anywhere near the percentage of the electorate, the vote in terms of the votes cast for them, that a ceasefire, a permanent, genuine ceasefire, not a bullshit pause that Biden calls a ceasefire, has. Like, every president in my lifetime, they've gotten about 30% or less of eligible voters. That's like that's half. That's half the overall support in the population amongst eligible voters for ending the genocide.
Slice that number down by half. The fact that there is such low voter turnout among these young, radically progressive people already, and you are now trying to say that threatening lower voter turnout would somehow result in the Democrats saying, you know what, we gotta change our policies to appeal.
Well, I mean, if you look at since you're doing some fucking research for your channel, then why didn't you pull up Biden's polling numbers? Because he's taken a hit, and that hit is very much on account of the genocide he's committing. Like, there are entire demographics who would otherwise definitely go for the Democrats, that in key states like Michigan, who are not going to turn out for him.
More to these young people. No, that's not going to happen. Politicians appeal to voters. When has any politician ever said, we got to appeal more to the non-voters?
Actually, Jeremy Corbyn did that, and it worked. Actually, he mobilized a whole lot of people as a result of that. In fact, I mean, another example of that recently would be, I don't know if you heard about it, but there was a presidential election in the United States in 2020. And one of the things that was done was to try to appeal to the non-voters and say, we have to keep this motherfucker out of office, so, you know, suck it up for vote for Biden. And people said, yeah, I mean, 4 years was more than enough of this guy. So, I mean, Biden sucks, but, I mean, he can't be worse than this guy, right? Yeah, those halcyon days.
No, they want to appeal more to the...
Oh, I'm going to just share that in chat then, Phoenix. Wrong window for that to be going into. Didn't mean for that to show up on stream like that. Yeah, I mean, Biden actually was, if it hadn't been for all the fucking bullshit that they pulled, that the rules allow them to pull during the primary, Biden was basically in last place apart from total no-hopers like Delaney that nobody had ever heard of. Like, out of all the serious candidates, he was at the bottom of the list. He was in fourth.
The voters. And so they're going to look at these demographics. They're going to look at 30 to 44 and 45 to 59-year-olds voting at a 56 to 66% rate already. And at best, they're going to try to like appeal with more like marginal, like center-leaning policies and.
Well, why would they do that? Because the center, what he calls the center, is actually the right wing. That's the thing you have to do. That's a funny thing the political class do, because they ignore public opinion entirely. And so the center is whatever the center of the political class is, and that is always, on most major issues, well to the right of the general public.
Appeal more to the center. Or if we're really unlucky, they're going to look at that 71% voter turnout among 60-year-olds and try to get even more conservative and become the old Republican Party.
They already are that, Xanderhole. Like, where the fuck have you been?
Worst case scenario is, in response to the young left-wing people refusing to vote, the Democratic Party says, okay, you know what? The Republicans have gotten so crazy and have become the such far-right party, we're going to move the Democratic Party right, which will...
I wonder, you know, that is a horrible thing that you're suggesting right there. I mean, that would be terrible if that had happened, like, say, every single presidential election since about 1992.
Which will be really easy once the squad gets booted out of power, because AIPAC is literally, like, has their sights set on them in this election, is going to boot them out of their...
Yeah, except they don't need AIPAC to do that. Because other than, like, Rashida Tlaib, there is no... I mean, they all have sucked. They all... Ilhan Omar has actually also, like, been one of the two card-carrying members of the human species in Congress. Everybody else has been absolutely horrible. So they don't need AIPAC to boot them out. What will boot them out, if anything, is that the huge voter turnout, actually that's another example, Xanderhole, since you were asking about appealing to non-voters. Yeah, I mean that was the squad. That was another thing that they were doing. They were appealing to the people who have been completely shut out of the official political process. And that's a big part of how they won. That was their whole marketing thing during their campaigns. Of course, the minute they got in, that you didn't hear much more about that.
Seats with like the biggest well-funded effort to destroy a group of people's political careers ever. The Democratic Party very well might just decide, you know what, we're going to become the old Bush-era Republican Party.
Like they're already to the right of the Bush-era Republican Party. That happened during the Obama years.
We're going to fill that gap that disappeared, or that appeared whenever Trump...
They would have to move left at this point to become the Bush-era Republican Party.
made the Republican Party how it...
Because Bush actually is another example of a U.S. president who did not like something Israel was doing and made them stop immediately. In that case, it had to do with making deals with China that probably would have involved classified U.S. technology. And so what all his White House did was they abruptly canceled meetings. There were like sort of high-level meetings between bureaucrats from the Israeli War Ministry and the U.S. Department of War and the Pentagon that were supposed to happen. Like, the Israeli representatives had already flown in, and so Bush, told the Pentagon, "You're not meeting with these people." They said, "Yeah." They canceled on short notice, totally snubbed them. It was humiliating. And Israel immediately backed down. So yeah, I mean, interesting example there.
What is now. Like, the idea that making, like, not voting among a demographic that's already not that appealing to try and pander to.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting mouthful he just said, though. Because it's true, it is not appealing to pander to the people who have largely boycotted the elections for decades now in the U.S. And the reason it's not appealing to the political class to pander to them is that they're poor as fuck. They're broke. And they have been on the shit end of the entirety of neoliberalism. Like, the entirety of neoliberalism has been to their detriment. And so appealing to them means reversing course, and the Democrats don't want to do that. And if somebody's preferences don't even figure in the electoral politics, then you don't have to worry about competing for them because they are no longer a factor.
Because of the already low voter turnout, despite the radically loud screaming LARPing among that demographic for how important politics is.
Well, the radically loud... He uses radically in interesting ways, does Xanderhole.
It's why the young left are so... Like, the young Gen Z left are so ineffective. They vote at like half the rate that 60-year-olds do.
Like, that's why you think that they're ineffective. Leaving aside, like, I mean, the first question is, are they ineffective? Because you look at a lot of this unionizing, that is a lot of the time it's younger workers doing that. It's in industries where the workforce tends to be younger. You look at, we've had a pretty serious strike wave in the past decade, and a lot of fairly young workers are involved in that. So even taking this idea that we can just look at age groups and go by that, this is just bullshit.
A 20-year-old person has no excuse not to go out and vote when a 70-year-old or a 60-year-old goes out and votes at a higher rate.
Oh god, you hear about that 20-year-olds? Xanderhole is judging you. The genocide guy, Xanderhole, the ex-Nazi, he's judging you. Because you don't take off work possibly lose your job to vote for a guy who, on a good day, tells you to fuck yourself.
Are you fucking serious? Are you telling me people in their 20s and their late teens in college have less means to go out and vote?
Fun fact, one of the vote suppression methods here in Ohio has historically been to make it harder to vote at colleges and universities. To cut down on the number of polling stations and voting machines available to ensure that the queues are extremely long in order to cut down the number of votes cast there.
Than someone in their 60s or 70s, and I'm sure they could be doing school or a job, but let's be real. A lot of these people are just like, I don't wanna, oh, it's too hard. You know how Gen Z is. Gen Z is like famously,
yeah, tell us how Gen Z is, motherfucker.
Non-functional. Like, come on. Come on, let's not fool ourselves. Let's not fool ourselves about the type of person who is advocating for you not to vote. They were never
What's the type of person?
going to vote anyway.
Really? Like, I just voted several times in the past couple of months. All for referendums, all for binding referendums, because that is a situation where it actually does make a difference. So when I'm advocating, when I'm saying there's no, like, fucking marginal benefit to be had for voting for this jabroni, and, I mean, I don't think that, clearly the Democrats are willing to throw this election. That is why their entire strategy is exactly what Xander Hole here is doing, which is to slag people off and try to shame them into supporting genocide, which doesn't work, actually. It's hard to... usually, the other way it works kind of well. I mean, not on Xander Hole, because the motherfucker has no shame. But... yeah, I agree that that isn't going to do it, because the Democrats don't give a shit, because they're willing to lose this election. But to suggest that it is the fault of the people the Democrats have declared have absolutely no good reason to go out and vote is just ridiculous.
The ongoing
Democrats are
genocide in
making
Gaza
choices.
has led to a noticeable shift.
I'm actually glad of him being on his ass, to be honest, Phoenix. Because imagine if he went out and did things. I don't think those things would be good. Well, because he thinks that the fact that he owns a microphone and gets paid to talk shit on the internet... Unlike me, I talk shit on the internet and I don't get paid. For the most part. He thinks that somehow makes him wise. He thinks that microphone ownership and knowing how to use OBS, at least rudimentarily, makes you a person with an opinion people care about. Or should care about.
In attitudes, in liberals and leftists alike across the West. We've had to watch as our political leaders march lockstep with Israel's brazen attempts to displace Palestinian people with no outlet.
It's all... This is...
Yup. What? Okay, you're bored to hear about this, are you, Xander Hole?
From a month ago. So now that the Democrats and Biden have, like, led the charge to stop what's happening...
No, they haven't. They have sent even more weapons. They are sending weapons in these structured transactions to avoid congressional oversight. They have made 100 different arms shipments to Israel.
Between Israel and Gaza, as I just featured, the narrative has switched. The bar has been raised for the Democrats, the bar that can never be reached.
Okay, what's wild about this, Justin Podor on Anti-Embargo Project in one of his Gaza sit reps recently was talking about the real shift, and the real shift is the bar getting lower. Because we've gone from ceasefire now, which was already just nothing. I mean, that is such a bare minimum thing. Like, the fact that that's being treated as a radical demand is, like, horrible. But now it's like, stop starving them. Don't, not even, and not free Palestine. not ceasefire, but like just at least let them eat a little. I mean, there is a tendency, actually, as this drags on, for the demands to get lower. But what Sanderhol is talking about is just bullshit. I mean, like, there's nobody... If anyone has led the way in trying to stop Israel, it is Yemen and South Africa. Yemen with their sanctions, which are really hitting. I mean, the port of Eilat is laying people off because the ships aren't going there now. Yemen has now announced they have like a supersonic missile capacity, and so now they're able to target Israeli shipping in the Indian Ocean. So yeah, and South Africa with their filing in the ICJ. If anyone is leading this, it is not the U.S. Like Canada, it has suspended arms. Has reinstated UNRWA funding and suspended arms trading. Spain has done that. Belgium has done that. Japan, at least some companies in Japan have done that. Like, lots of countries have done way more than the U.S. is doing, because the U.S. is doing literally the opposite. The U.S. is making this possible. The U.S. is the one country... Well, I mean, South Africa could do some things if they want, but it would be riskier. Like, so one thing South Africa has two advantages in all this. One, a reasonable sized navy, and two, being far the fuck away from Israel. Because if South Africa were to, say, send a flotilla, like an aid flotilla, with a naval escort, which has not been done before. All the other ones have been totally civilian, totally undefended, and they all got wrecked. But, like, if somebody sent an aid flotilla to run the blockade on Gaza with a naval escort to protect it, then that would put Israel and the U.S. in front of a serious choice. Either to start a war with an uninvolved country that is just trying to deliver aid, or allow the blockade to end. And if the blockade ends, then it ends for everybody. So, I mean, that's a thing, potentially, that, like, these governments that are taking, at the very least, a decent rhetorical stance, and have, like, armies and navies and stuff, could potentially do. Yeah, I mean, it absolutely could be. I mean, that is a thing that... And the thing is, I mean, what the fuck would Israel do? Oorlog maakt in South Africa? It's on the other end of the fucking planet. It's an entire hemisphere away. They're not gonna do that. And aside from that, they're flat out trying to deal with Yemen, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian resistance. Я не знаю, могу ли вам помочь. Вот, зависит от того, что тебе нужно.
And now it's the Democrats calling out Israel and calling out its leadership and its treatment of the Palestinians is pivoting, diverting blame, rather than before when it was they're being silent.
Well, no, it wasn't they were being silent. They were being vocal. They were being vocally opposed to a ceasefire. Now they're being subtly opposed to a ceasefire. They're still opposed. They just worked out that you can't just say, fuck the ceasefire. You can't have your White House propaganda officer saying that it's despicable that people want a ceasefire. You can't have Biden being asked about a ceasefire and saying, yeah, no fucking chance, because it doesn't look good. So now they use the word, but they don't mean what everybody else means. Xander Hall.
For resistance in conventional politics. And then with the elections in the US and the UK coming up this year, this is naturally...
You couldn't vote in 2016 because you had no driver's license. Unless there are voter ID laws in your area that restrict you, a state-issued ID is fine. I don't have a driver's license.
Well, yeah, unless there are voter ID laws in your area that restrict you. Yeah, that's the point, Xander Hole. There are those in a lot of places. I've had problems using a passport.
Voted in every election since I got my driver's license and was 18. So, yeah, I don't know.
Who gives a shit, man? Like, who cares?
Tell ya.
It would be good if you learned to say that more often, Xander Hole, because you don't. You really don't know what to tell anybody. but you still run off at the fucking mouth. Yeah, fuck off, Alan Latte. Hang on, I got some trolls in here. This is like the first time I've actually had, let me see. Palestine isn't real, check the facts. Fuck you, man. Like, did somebody like share the Twitch link to someplace other than the normal place? Hang on, is this? Do I have this set as a followers only chat? I should have it set as a followers only chat. Sorry about this. Where the hell where is that setting? Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Кто кого победит?
I like get a state issued ID, Uber to the.
Oh yeah, I mean, fun fact, as Xander Hole, there are now laws that make it really hard for trans people to get those in some places.
To the DMV, they take a picture. I couldn't go anywhere. Okay, so I'm sure there are reasons. However,
shut the fuck up. I mean, it's amazing. He will accept all sorts of excuses for genocide. Oh, well, and I mean, I'm not saying I wasn't meaning to discourage people sharing a link, but it just occurred to me, I've like basically never had like any kind of dodgy shit apart from some link spam show up on Twitch on this channel. And so I thought maybe it's been shared someplace that I previously previously had not seen it. Like, I mean, there was like one bullshit pro-Israel comment in here. Hello, Alurista. What language that was? Well, I mostly speak in English. I briefly lapsed over into Afrikaans and Russian, though.
There are a lot of Gen Zers give a whole lot of reasons for why they couldn't go out and vote.
You know, I know of some boomers who give a whole lot of reasons for why they have to keep doing genocide. Why don't you talk about them for a bit?
But meanwhile, 70-year-olds go out, or 60-year-olds go out and vote at a 70% rate. I don't know, guys. It feels like those decrepit-ass boomers should be less capable than people in the prime of their lives.
Well, those decrepit-ass boomers are from like from a generation that often. First of all, the ones who are likely to vote tend to be better off. They've probably got their own transportation. I mean, and with every passing generation in this country, that becomes more of a challenge economically.
Leading people to question whether or not these genocide enablers even deserve our votes to begin with. And then from there,
obviously being
in the
underage
US,
for
has
voting
typical
doesn't count.
discourses of harm reduction and lesser evil voting spin up too. Today then, I want to make the case explicitly against voting as the strongest strategy that the left currently has available.
Okay, now I will say here's where I definitely disagree with Sexisy. I don't know how that's pronounced. I also don't know this creator's pronouns. I'm using the cowards they because I looked and I couldn't find pronouns anywhere, so I'm just I'm happy to be corrected if somebody knows, and my apologies if I'm getting it wrong. I have tried to find it. But anyway, this is one place where I disagree. I don't think it's the strongest strategy. I don't even think it's a particularly strong strategy. I mean, threatening to withhold your vote specifically for like Genocide Joe might be a use. That's exactly what I'm doing. That's what the cowards they is. Might, it's not nothing. But clearly the Democrats are willing to lose elections. Same with Labor. Same with fucking Queer Harmer, that prick who runs the Labor Party now. He's happy to lose elections. He's like making the party as unpopular as he possibly can. It's like the producers over there. The Springtime for Hitler Party. But it's not a particularly strong thing. Our strength comes from two things. We are needed, our participation is needed in order to maintain profitability, and our acquiescence is needed in order to maintain governability. Those are the two things, those are the two levers we've got. And right now, we are not, the AB marches and shit. The AB marches and shit are not really threatening either of those things. They are essentially appealing to the democratic instincts of institutions that don't have democratic instincts. There are lots of ways to, there have been some attempts at like port shutdowns and shutting down the access to arms companies and shit like that, which is good. That is definitely a positive development. That is an example of sort of more effective stuff. Because that threatens profitability potentially. It also threatens governability. And those are the things, those are the levers of power we really have. They're not scared of us at this point. They are not afraid of what will happen if they continue this genocide. Nobody has given them a reason to be afraid. And that's the problem at the moment.
Hilarious. Go on.
Now, because my usual video production process apparently takes months or even years now, I'm slapping this together at a much lower production quality, just so I can get it out while it still has some relevancy. For anyone wondering, I am also working on a much longer, much fancier video on the side, but that's still a bit off from here. So. I just realized my neck is purple, because...
Why is relevancy a word?
Labor isn't even decent as an opposition party. It was briefly decent with Corbyn in. Before that, they weren't an opposition party. They were just tacitly... members of the coalition. They weren't officially in the coalition government, but they voted with the coalition government. And, they became an opposition party for a while with Corbyn, to some limited extent. But, with Queer Harmer running things, with Kid Starver, that's over. They are now they're just backing everything the Tories do. But yeah, they are always, the Democrat and the Labour Party both are always at the height of their progressiveness as opposition parties. They always move to the right in power. Well, I consider it important to get these things right, Kid Astro, and the thing is, their gender presentation is not at all straightforward, and I like to try to be respectful of that.
Why did people start saying relevancy? Because it's just relevance.
Oh, well, no, relevancy is also a word.
Adding an extra syllable is more work and wrong. When did that become a thing? It's like
fucking ages ago.
Irregardless. It's just regardless. Why did people start adding the ear to it? It's more syllables. It's more breath, more work. And wrong.
You just described your entire channel, though, Xander Hall. You would save so many syllables and so much breath and so much wrongness if you just didn't do your channel. Admittedly, I'd have to go find another jabroni to be taking the piss out of and stuff. It would have a collateral detriment for me. But on my account, I'm willing to take that L.
How'd that catch on?
My floor LED is on, and it's too late to turn it off, so... If you're wondering, I'm not diseased, that's just why. So,
I was wondering about the neck turning purple. I was really confused, is that a camera error? Is there, a very thin, narrow light shining onto their neck? I don't know.
observation of the current moment is that the rejection to vote is the most effective path towards radicalization.
Yeah, I mean, this I definitely don't agree with. I don't think that this. But it makes more sense than the crap that Zanderhol's putting
Due to being
out.
presented a choice between different genocide enablers, a shift in attitude against voting has taken place for many younger liberals and leftists alike.
I mean, the shift happened a long time ago, in Britain too, actually. I mean, you see very similar developments in this regard in a lot of countries that I've spent time studying. And it usually, what it comes down to is very much that voting and income correlate. The more money people have, the more likely they are to vote. Voting is very much an ABC1 kind of thing, because the more money you have, the more likely it's going to make a difference to you. The more likely you're also going to have somebody who, available to vote for, a serious candidate who is actually going to be on your side about things. And, roughly, the poorest third of the population tends to give it a miss. Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough that he pretends to, know anything, but him trying to be a pedant, he is not cut out to be a pedant.
The framing of this is so virtue signaling, right? Between two genocide enablers, as if...
Well, I mean, that's not virtue signaling, that's just a fact.
This is something new. What
it kind of is, though, because we literally have not seen this level of mass slaughter at this rate in this short a time with this clearly stated genocidal intent in a very long time. In fact, I mean, experts in genocide say that it is just kind of practically unique to have genocidal intent be so explicit. Usually that is the thing that you have to make a lot of effort to prove. And, Israeli officials are just coming right out and saying it. They've got kids on TV singing about their genocidal intent. They're being very open about that. Numerically, just straight quantitatively, this is actually a very unusual thing that's going on, and it is easily one of the worst fucking atrocities. I mean, possibly the worst atrocity I have lived through. And I've lived through some seriously, I mean, my lifetime goes back to 1979, so there's a lot of atrocities in there. But, I mean, in terms of living through it in real time, in terms of the number of people at risk, in terms of the explicit statement of intent to murder them all, this is unusual.
What really kind of bugs me about all of this recent...
You're not telling me anything new, Kit Astro. The fact is that Biden is the one person that Trump has a chance against, and the Democrats insist on using him. Literally, they are throwing this election by not sending him off to the broom closet.
Explosion. All right, chat.
He thinks this. Look at that little impish grin of his. He always gets this when he thinks he's about to say something clever. Chat, we want to do an over-under on how likely he is to actually be about to say something clever.
I imagine many of you guys aren't into sports. Neither am I. The only sport I'm into is swimming, because I was into swimming. I guess technically MMA, because I did jiu-jitsu as well. Any sport that I've actively participated in, I find interesting because I know it. I've done it. I know the mechanics of it, and so I'm interested in seeing people
I don't give a shit. But go on.
do it well. And so swimming and MMA are my favorite. But when it comes to basketball,
MMA. I see. I happen to have something of a black belt in Taekwondo, and now I just kind of want to get him in the ring. It's been a very long time since I did any Taekwondo, but I have a feeling that my just sheer dislike of this asshole might allow me to win fairly quickly.
football, baseball, etc., where there's teams associated with a given city or region of the country. Something I've noticed is a trend is, let's say somebody has their team, right? Like,
wow, he's discovered people having supporting sports teams.
uh, I'm not good at sports, but let's say for example, someone's a fan of the Cubs. Now the Cubs, up until 2015 or 16, I think it was 2015. I think it was like literally the one thing Back to the Future got right. Up until 2015, except for Trump, they also got that right. Up until like 2015, the Cubs hadn't won the World
Army days. I was never in the Army. And I wouldn't have been old enough to be in the Army when I was doing Taekwondo. I did it until I was 13. Then my marks in school were too bad, and I had to leave it.
Series in a long ass time, right? And so the Cubs were seen as a pretty shitty team in terms of performance, like in the World Series and like the grand scheme of things. But then in 2015, and my stepdad was a Cubs fan, so I was very aware of this. He was quite thrilled.
Like, okay, I'm just kind of wondering, what the fuck is his point? He's going so hard into this talk about the Cubs, a team that, like, literally the only thing he knows is that they're not any good. I'm not saying that I'm better. Baseball is not my sport. My sport is cricket. And rugby a little bit if Wales are playing or England are losing. But mostly it's cricket. That is the only sport I follow. So, like, I'm not saying I know more about this than him, but one thing I do not know that maybe he does not even know is, where in the hell is he going with this?
Never was the house louder. The Cubs fucking won the World Series. Right? And then all of a sudden, everyone was a Cubs fan. You know?
I don't
Just
remember
overnight.
that. I mean, I remember people thinking it was really cool that the Cubs won it, since for a very long time they'd never won anything. It's sort of like a lot of people who actually supported other teams thought Iceland rocked and sort of had Iceland as their second team in the World Cup a few years ago, because this team made up of like dentists and accountants and paralegals, not a single professional athlete in the bunch, made it like as far as I think the quarterfinals, was it? I mean, it was like, I remember it because I went to Iceland that year, and the one thing I wanted to bring back as a gift for a friend of mine was a fucking Iceland jersey. And they were sold out because everyone coming to Iceland wanted one to commemorate that season, because it's a really cool thing that they pulled off. That's why. It's why people who don't support West Indies in cricket still love to watch the 1980s team play. Still, you know, it's
just that the sun went down one night and nobody gave a fuck about the Cubs. Next morning comes up and everybody is all of a sudden a Cubs fan. Every coworker at work all of a sudden has a Cubs koozie on their water thing. Everybody.
I mean, the electoral system, I wouldn't call it broken, because it is doing what it is there for. And what it's there for just sucks shit. It is there to create the illusion of participation, the illusion of choice, while limiting the options to the point where basically the majority of the population's priorities are completely excluded from the exercise.
Everybody's got a Cubs hat on, a Cubs shirt on. It's like, damn, it's like so many Cubs fans just emerged overnight out of nowhere because the Cubs happened to...
Oh god, I know what he's doing with this. He's saying, like, why, you know, he's gonna suggest it somehow unseemly that people have sort of awakened to Palestine solidarity in response to the genocide, and he's going to liken that to, people applauding the Cubs for pulling something off that nobody thought they were going to, because his entire moral universe is just a very strange place.
To be popular because they've just won the World Series. This happens all the time in sports, supposedly. Like, team that nobody gives a fuck about, like, individual person has always been a loyal fan, and then all of a sudden that team has a lucky season or a good season, and, like, everybody is a fan of the team out of nowhere because they're just bandwagoning, and it's super...
Well, yeah, I mean, again, first of all, this is so totally irrelevant. You spent such a long time on this. It's utterly irrelevant. But that's the thing. It's really cool when a rank outsider goes in to win. When Leicester City won, I think they won the FA Cup. I mean, nobody gave a shit about Leicester City. But they did that, and it was the coolest thing ever. Because, like, they had risen from, like, one league to the next in no time at all, and suddenly they were beating the teams that always win these things, and it's just a cool thing to see. Like, it's like, he has such cynicism about people's attitudes towards sports, and such like naivety when it comes to his views about Democrats' views about genocide.
Super annoying. That's how I kind of feel when it comes to the Israel-Gaza conflict. I don't know.
The conflict. Fuck you, man.
If Zig Zizi was like, you know, non-outspoken about this before, but like,
I'm guessing that somebody who's described themselves as a Marxist, and probably is not just recently pro-Palestinian, but here's the thing. Let me just say this. Let me get really up close to the microphone and say this, Sanderhall, because it's of an important point. Who gives a fuck? A lot of people had never given any thought to Rwanda until there was a genocide there. Okay, like, there is not any issue you can mention, any horrible thing going on you can mention. There is always going to be somebody who just recently understood why it matters and why it matters to them. It doesn't matter what you come up with. That's always happened. That is, like, and I mean, sometimes you can say, like, if it's somebody with a public platform, say they're like a fairly well-known streamer, and they have just never given a shit about this, and they're not using their platform to do anything about it, and in fact they're like slagging people off for caring about it. I forget what I was about to say, but I mean, I think it just comes down to fuck you, Sanderhall.
I've done content calling out and talking about Israel and its treatment of the Palestinians for a long time. Notably, like, I remember a time back...
I had to search really hard to find any videos with anything Palestine-related in the title.
2019, where I was covering Ben Shapiro and going over his, like, statements about the Palestinians and how he supports the genocide of the Palestinians by Israel, and going over it back then.
It's interesting how when it's a hypothetical genocide that, you know, that Ben Shapiro says he supports. I mean, he's supporting the actual one, you know, right now as well. But then he can use the word genocide. But he can't use the word genocide to describe what's going on now, even though, like, the majority of the Palestinians killed by Israel since 1948, like, by far, the overwhelming majority were killed since October of this year. I mean, October of last year, rather. We haven't had October of this year. Like, literally, it had been... You know how many Palestinians Israel and the U.S. had killed in the entire 21st century up until October? 6,000. 6,000. Like, they have killed 5, or, well, they've killed more than 5. They've killed, actually, like, 7 at this point since October, for every one they had killed between January 1st, 2000 and October 6, 2023. Like, so, yeah.
And in, like, 2019, in the first year of my channel. And I feel like I've been, like, a pretty consistent knower of the fact that any given sitting president of the United States has been complicit in the genocide of the Palestinians, because this is...
Yeah, but there's what's called an incremental genocide, which is what people were talking about with the siege, for example, with the very sort of slow drip ethnic cleansing of the West Bank and Gaza and occupied East Jerusalem. But that is a whole different universe to what is going on now, where 2 million people are actually at very acute risk of getting killed in the very short term, actually, with the way that the U.S.-Israeli imposed famine is biting. Like, there is a difference. This is, like, the worst thing that that people have ever seen. Nobody has ever seen a genocide streamed in real time before. Like, even Rwanda, like that, and Srebrenica and all that. There wasn't this kind of communications technology going on where the people who were being murdered could film it and show it to them to people as it was happening. So yeah, some people woke up to this as a result of that. And the only thing that you can say about that actually is good. Like, I mean, he's like trying to discourage people. Like, you didn't give a shit about Palestine before this, so fuck you, you shouldn't give a shit about it now? Fuck you, man.
Has been going on for decades. And it's not just Palestine and the Palestinians that are being genocided, with the U.S. Enabling it, by the way. There have been many genocides happening at the same time, and even across history that the U.S. has either been complicit in or downright supported or funded.
Like, yeah, but that's very true. But that's not an argument against trying to stop this one. Like, I can't do anything about the, like, genocides of indigenous people, that inaugurated the creation of this regime I'm living in, because that happened way before I was born. There's not a whole lot I can do about the genocide they committed in Indochina, because Indochina already kicked them out. Vietnam kicked them out. And that was all before I was fucking born. You know, the, like, genocidal sanctions of mass destruction, I actually, against Iraq, starting in 1991, that was closer to this, but, I mean, the number of people who were killed in the 12 years that those so-called sanctions lasted, that is half of the number of people who are likely to be killed before November if this thing keeps up in Gaza.
Or armed. This is not anything new. Every U.S. president that has ever sat at the Oval Office has had blood on their hands. This is just the reality of politics when you are a citizen of the country that thinks...
Which is why the radical lefties that he likes to slag off, like the ones who actually could, as far as I'm concerned, be eligible for the term, I mean, who fuck knows what he includes in it? He probably includes himself in it, which I don't, for lots of reasons. Which is why, like, radical lefties say we have to get rid of this entire fucking regime. The entire system is guilty, and the only way we're ever going to really put a stop to it is to end the capitalist system.
It's the world police. So when you've all of a sudden got all these lefties coming along who are making the argument that now is when we have to put our foot down and we have to go against these two genocide enablers, it's like...
Well, yeah, because, like, 1.5 million, like, 2 million lives depend on it. That's kind of why.
Where the fuck have you been?
Who cares? Who gives a shit? Who gives an absolute shit? I mean, I'm exempting from this people who have platforms. See, the thing is, what I care about, particularly in the world of people who have platforms, people like Sanderhall, is, are they, especially if it is a political platform, what are they doing about this? Are they silent about this? Are they complicit about this? Sanderhall has been complicit. The last thing we watched of his, he was doing just outright pro-Israel propaganda. Just straight up lies that Israel puts out. Yeah. So, I mean, the reason people are putting their foot down is because they want to stop it. they don't, because the thing is, you read in the history books about like these genocides that people didn't stop who were in a position to do it, and everybody's like, yeah, fuck those people, what the fuck were they doing, they should have done something to stop it, you know. And people don't want to be like those people, they want to actually try to put a stop to it, and that's a good thing, actually. Like, I mean, not a thing to be discouraging.
What the fuck changed? Like, did all the kids that were dying for all these decades when, like, other Republicans and Democrats were president, did they not matter? But right now, because...
Like, I think you'll find, Xanderhall, that a lot of the people who are involved in this have been involved in all of the shit you're in fighting against all the shit you're talking about. Unlike you, I should add. Like, I mean, I've been paying attention to Palestine and paying close attention, trying to really understand exactly what's going on and what to do about it, and following all the atrocities and the role of the U.S. in making them all possible for as long as this motherfucker's been alive. Actually, like literally as long as he's been alive. I started in about 1999. That's when I started to realize that there was actually something fucked up going on in Palestine. I had not previously been privy to that, and I saw some stuff and I was like, okay, this is fucked up, I need to know more, I need to do something about this. And so, 25 years later, here we are. And a lot of people are like that. You'll find a lot of people that you probably slagged off for being against the things that you're now berating people for hypothetically not having been against were there. I mean, it's like, but of course, if he would go, yeah, access to information has massively increased. Like, we did not have live video being recorded and sent out from like the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in real time. We didn't get any film of that. We have the memoirs. We have the resistance, the Palestinian resistance, sending out detailed video of their engagements with the occupation forces on a daily basis. And we have Israel providing the stuff that's like, it's great propaganda domestically, but it's horrible internationally, showing all these disgusting pricks like emptying their mags into kindergarten classrooms and like going through the fucking underwear drawers of women they've murdered, and that has a way of radicalizing people, and that's a good thing, actually. It's like, why the fuck are you trying to discourage that?
The whole internet is talking about Palestine and Israel, and any post about it gets a bunch of likes on Twitter, and you get a lot of virtue signal points for talking about the plight of the Palestinians. Is it like...
Yeah, well, because there is an active effort in the media to lie about it, to downplay it, to misrepresent it, especially in the United States. And so people are trying to signal boost accurate information to ensure that the people who aren't already focusing on it realize what's going on, because there are people who are being algorithmed out of even seeing any of it, like because that's just not, they don't follow people who are doing it, and so therefore they're not seeing those posts. And so it is kind of important to raise that kind of awareness of what exactly is going on, because for some people, like not ex-Nazis like Xanderhall, I mean, being an ex-Nazi has a different approach to genocide, because he remembers a time when he thought it was a wonderful thing, and he still kind of does, but yeah, I just can't help thinking that this motherfucker was more performatively angry about hypothetical white genocide than he is about the actual one going on here. Like, he has not done content about this. I mean, it's not specifically to raise the awareness of his audience about what's going on. Every bit of content that I have found about this genocide has been him trying to use it as a campaign talking point for the president who is doing it.
Is that the only reason why you're talking about this, or do you actually care? Because it feels like it's just all of this hyper aggressive, don't vote for blue no matter who sentiment really blew up in regards to Israel-Palestine. And
yeah, I wonder if something happened that made a lot of people disgusted. Like, wouldn't that be wild if there was a major event, like a fucking an event that everybody knows they will be asked for the rest of their lives where they stood on it and what they tried to do about it? I wonder if there was like an event like that in the past couple of months, Sandra Hole, that might explain why people are so hyper focused on it.
once it became popular to talk about after the October 7th attack, and yeah, it just feels so disingenuous. It feels like my sports analogy. Like,
yeah, he is. I mean, he's right. His sports analogy was disingenuous.
people are just jumping on the bandwagon and disingenuously virtue signaling about a really fucked up tragedy, but they're not actually willing to do anything that would prevent.
What are you willing to do, motherfucker? You talk about they're not willing to do anything. It's like, what are you doing? You have a platform. I think it's, what is it, like, how many fucking subs has he got? 86.5 thousand subs this motherfucker has. That's how many people would be likely to see any content he does, raising awareness about this, drawing attention to places that you can support, to like protests and things like that, to accurate source of information. He's not doing that. Like, he's literally, I mean, and he seems to be kind of proud of the fact that he is not using his platform to help Palestinians. And he's like slagging people off here because they're focused on the worst atrocity this century, and trying to figure out a way to not be complicit in it and try to make it stop. Like, motherfucker, you have a huge platform and you are literally trying to discourage people from caring about this. That is vile, actually, Xander Hall. That is the most vile. I mean, it's like every time I watch this prick, I hear the worst thing he ever said. The worst thing I ever heard him say. He breaks his record every single time. This is going to take some fucking beating.
Prevent it from getting worse. That's the thing. The Democrats, even if they don't make things better, Trump has outright proudly stated he will make it worse for the Palestinians.
No, he hasn't, actually. What he has stated is literally what's already happening. The only difference is that he says the quiet part out loud. Like, literally, all the stuff that he said is stuff that is already going on.
Palestinians. He will back Israel harder than the Democrats could ever dream.
How could you? How is that even possible? How could you back them harder than the Democrats could ever... I mean, the Democrats have vetoed every single ceasefire resolution. They have broken every fucking record in terms of getting more weapons to Israel to ensure that this genocide could continue. And the genocide could not continue if they did not keep that up, because Israel is blowing through their stocks at a just a ridiculous, unconscionable, like, fucking GTA 5 cheat mode pace. There is no way that you could actually back them harder than they already are being backed. And the thing he's talking about, the statements that Trump and his people have made, are actually an example of him backing them more incompetently. Because what Biden is doing is a hell of a lot, is the smarter way of doing it. Because he knows that you have to distance yourself. You have to give people a chance to make excuses for you. That there are liberals who will want to make excuses. People like Xander Hall will want to make excuses for why he's doing all his can and all that shit. They will not be able to make those excuses for Trump, because Trump is just being quite open about it. Trump is actually quite war focused. Like, I mean, people will say he didn't start any wars, but he didn't end any either. He continued the ones that were already going on.
Dream of.
With the previously unthinkable of not voting for anybody being taken seriously. What's special about this is that not voting is a fundamentally illogical, nonsensical position. Yet despite this, people are being...
I also don't agree. I don't see why it's illogical or nonsensical. It's, I mean, not, you know, you vote. In fact, I mean, we can look at actual, like, voter turnout information and polling and stuff like that, and you can see this. People vote when they think that doing so will have a real, tangible, positive effect on their lives, and when they don't think that's the case, they don't. You see that in Britain, you see that in the US, you see that in Germany, you see that in Chile, you see that all over the place. I'm listing places that I've actually paid enough attention to be able to say that with any confidence. I'm sure that if you looked at other places, you would find a similar pattern. Like, so I don't think that's nonsensical at all.
Drawn to it anyway. This is because, in a political landscape such as ours, still mired in capitalist realism, where alternatives can scarcely be imagined, let alone be made feasible, resistance can often manifest as a desire to reject society altogether. In a sense, the only response to a world in which revolution or even reform feel hopelessly out of grasp is to simply declare, I cannot imagine a new future, but I don't need one to reject the present existence anyway.
I don't think that is... I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are actually doing that at the moment. I think that is actually, you know, why there is such significant working class abstention in elections in a lot of places, including the US and Britain. I don't think that has actual revolutionary potential on its own, because, I mean, if it did, it would have already happened. You do need to do more shit than just that. Hey, Jax. Amper klar med stream.
Oh my god, this is so fucking cringe, dude.
Motherfucker, you have no purchase in the cringe universe. You don't get to talk about things being cringe. You're here berating people for deciding that Palestine was something to pay attention to in the midst of, like, the worst mass murder this century.
Dude.
That,
oh my...
you don't, like, your cringe, your ability to judge cringe is permanently impaired.
Fucking, no wonder so much of the online left is failing right now. You ever see...
How would you fucking know? Like, failing at what? You never define what the goal is.
Like one of those scenes in a movie where there's like a train and they have like the train is headed straight for like a cliff because like the tracks go right off a cliff, and then there's one, like all the characters run to the back of the train and they're in the final boxcar and they pull like the bolt up, despite the fact that's not physically possible when a train's moving. They pull the bolt up to let the train release the final like caboose cart to like sort of fall back, right, with like with the brakes, so it's not being pulled forward by the rest of the weight of the train. And like all the train falls off the cliff except for the one cart.
He needs to stop making analogies. His analogies take years to explain, and then they turn out not to be very suitable.
Where all the main characters are, and it like grinds to a halt. That's how I feel, but I'm that final cart with the rest of the online left.
The rest of the... I love how he, like, makes himself an honorary leftist on account of, like, nothing, actually.
At the moment. It feels like so much of the online left is getting, like, absolutely shit on by the majority of the internet. Or
what the fuck kind of metric is that? What?
Or just going down a path that is just so dumb and wrong with their takes or behavior that it's not going to end well. Like, this line of thought is not going to gain popularity and vibe out well outside of a very niche group of online people.
Yeah, that's a really funny thing to say, but the whole reason that Biden's administration has changed their entire rhetoric, has changed their entire presentation, and planted all these bullshit stories about how supposedly Biden behind closed doors is saying nasty things about Benjamin Netanyahu and all this bullshit. The reason they're doing that is because what he's treating as some sort of weird niche phenomenon of online lefties is actually, like, a significant segment of the population. like enough that Biden is shitting in the polls. Biden's probably not going to manage fucking Michigan, for example. I mean, there was a huge uncommitted vote. Like the goals that people had set for the uncommitted vote, where that was an option in these bullshit primaries, was much lower than the actual number of people who turned out and voted uncommitted. Like, I mean, to act like this is some sort of tiny thing that he can just deride, like, that is, I mean, either he does not know what the fuck he's talking about, and I have entire faith in his ability to be ignorant. It is entirely possible he genuinely believes that this bullshit is true because he's just never bothered to look into it because he is the most incurious motherfucker ever. But if he isn't, then then this is like deeply sinister because he's trying to convince people, again, the 80,000 plus people who care what this motherfucker thinks, that they shouldn't care about this, that it doesn't matter, that all that matters is ensuring that Joe Biden, Joe Biden's care and feeding is taken care of in the White House for another 4 years.
Most left-leaning people in America are not like us or like this person. They are the types of people who elected Biden. How many times did you hear from people like this back in 2020 that brown people don't support Biden?
Yeah, and actually, true story, actually.
Support Bernie, and yet the Hispanic...
Yeah, in fact, the polls, the reason they were saying that, Xander Hall, is the polls said that. In fact, Biden was actually really unpopular. Biden was not in fourth place in the primary until, like, the people who were in second and third threw him their votes, because you're just allowed to do that sort of bullshit out of nowhere in a U.S. Democrat primary.
Hispanic and black vote was, like, overwhelmingly in favor of Biden, even during the primaries?
No. Actually, I mean, he's just making up his own alternate timeline. Because no.
Like, the idea that, like, black and brown Americans were, like, falling behind Bernie
is backed up by the polls, because apart from everything else, Biden is a white supremacist. Bernie sucks. Bernie's shit. Especially on, like, very specifically, things that specifically matter to communities of color, like not getting murdered by the cops. He's absolutely worthless on that. He is terrible on that. He's not as bad as Biden, I will say. But I mean, it's easy to not be as bad as Biden. You just have, on that particular issue. But, so that's not the point. But the thing is, actually, Biden was not very popular. It was like guys like Zanderhole who were the real, white libs.
Was a complete made-up fucking fantasy by internet lefties. In reality,
yeah, it was a conspiracy, Zanderhole, to manipulate all the polling in order to prove Zanderhole wrong. That's all it was. That's all it was. The polling, all the polling data that says he's full of shit is just some sort of giant conspiracy.
Massive amounts of support went to Biden instead. This thought process that, like, POC in America.
Also, let's just remember the tiny number of people who even vote in these primaries. I mean, you're talking about when you get to, like, black turnout or just general POC turnout or something like that in these primaries, you're talking about single-digit percentages. Most people are not voting in them. So you can't really judge all that much based on any of this shit.
They're waiting for the revolution. They're waiting for land back. It's like, no.
Wait, who the hell is saying that? What do you mean waiting for? Like,
no, they want
come on, Mr. White Supremacist, tell me more about what black people think.
Republican who is actively going to make their lives worse to not get elected because they're not fucking stupid, they're not LARPing, and this shit actually affects them. And they're adults for the most part as well.
The urge not to vote is one such instance of a blind resistance.
I mean, see, here we have, see, I have sympathy for the general idea that sexy, or however that's pronounced, is saying here. But the idea that it is an effective, or even the most effective means of doing something about this, that is... I do not see how anyone could possibly come up with that. But I see it is time to start wrapping up, so I just want to thank everyone for joining in. It's always lovely to see you all. I will be back. Sorry. 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time this coming Friday. And in the meantime, you can always check out the Patreon. Well, if you aren't already there, it is a place to be. Not necessarily the place to be, I suppose, but it is a place to be. And if you want it to be a place you are, then this link is the place to go to achieve that purpose. Thank you, Totsins. Good to see you all. I hope you enjoyed the stream. And also, let me just briefly tell you that I've got a new crowdfunded translation project going on. The works of Inessa Arbon, who was the Alexander Kollontai's predecessor at the women's section of the Bolsheviks. And her works have been totally suppressed. So there are no English translations other than the ones that I have done of two of her essays, extant. And I'm trying to raise about $8,500 to cover the cost of translating and editing them over the next year, roughly. So signal boosting and contributions are, of course, welcome. And one place you can go to find out to do that is at my Patreon. So let me just drop that link before I go. Have a good night. Thank you to everyone. Look forward to seeing you next week.